All it took was one call to the Pentagon, just one, to shatter careers and prove that no matter where you are, injustice has a way of catching up. It was meant to be just another quiet drive through the forgotten stretches of Louisiana, the kind of place people barely glance at while passing through on their way to somewhere else. For General Naomi Ellsworth, this was familiar territory. She'd made drives like this dozens of times. No motorcade, no security entourage, no need for a grand show. Just her, a government-issued rental, and a mission she needed to complete. She was on her way to Barksdale Air Force Base for a high-level meeting, classified, urgent, and definitely not the kind of thing you postpone. Somewhere along the Tulane Road, between Lake Charles and Shreveport, right outside a blink-and-you'll-miss-it town called Mosswood, Naomi glanced at her secure device and noticed something troubling. Her signal was dropping fast. She didn't have the luxury of waiting. The call she needed to make couldn't wait another hour, let alone until she reached base. Her eyes scanned the roadside and caught sight of a worn-out gas station just ahead. Kelly's Fuel and Food. It looked like it hadn't seen a renovation since the 80s. Cracked pavement, sun-bleached signage, and a few beat-up trucks parked out front. But Naomi didn't need fancy. She just needed functional. She pulled into the far end of the lot, away from the crowd gathered near the pumps, locals in sweat-stained caps, leaning on truck beds and exchanging small-town gossip in the muggy heat. No one paid her much attention at first. She stepped out, phone in hand, her voice low and steady. "General Ellsworth verifying identity, initiating briefing," she said as the secure connection clicked on. Instantly, a voice from the Pentagon began feeding her real-time intel, orders that only a few elite figures had access to. She nodded subtly, her eyes moving across the lot. Alert but not obvious. Years of training had taught her how to blend in while staying sharp. To anyone else, she was just another traveler. Plain jeans, sneakers, a loose olive jacket, and a ball cap pulled down over her tightly twisted hair. No rank, no medals, nothing flashy. That was by design. But not everyone saw a civilian. Not everyone saw what was really there. Inside the station, behind the smudged glass counter, stood Paula Sweeney, mid-50s, stiff blonde bun. Eyes narrowed from years of suspicion and self-righteousness. To her, Naomi wasn't a four-star general. She wasn't anyone worth respect. She was a problem. Suspicious. Out of place. And Paula had made up her mind in seconds. She picked up the old beige landline and turned her back to the customers. "Yeah, it's Paula," she whispered. "We got a shady woman hanging around the pumps. Real sketchy. Could be on drugs or something. She's acting strange. Y'all better come check it out." She hung up before the dispatcher could ask anything else. A few minutes later, on the far side of town, Officers Randall Cooper and Shaw Delaney were lounging in their cruiser when the call came through. Cooper, bulky with a buzz cut and a chip on his shoulder, chuckled as he threw on his sunglasses. Delaney, wiry and young, followed suit. "Might as well stir things up," one of them said, flipping the sirens on. Back at the gas station, Naomi stayed focused on the briefing, unaware that trouble was racing her way. But just as she prepared to receive her next orders, red and blue lights lit up the station windows. Gravel crunched sharply under speeding tires. She turned slowly, phone still in hand, and saw two patrol cars skid to a stop. The officers were already out of the vehicle before it even settled, hands twitching near their holsters. Cooper approached first, posture aggressive. Delaney flanked him, copying every move. Naomi calmly placed her secure phone on the hood of her car and raised her hands slightly, palms visible. The air shifted. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to, because she knew. Whatever was about to happen wasn't just about her. And it wouldn't end quietly. Naomi stood tall, her palms open and facing forward, just as she'd been trained. Her voice remained calm, measured, precise, the same way it had been drilled into her since her early days at West Point. "Good afternoon, officers," she said, keeping her tone professional. "How can I help you?" Officer Cooper didn't even blink. "License and registration." Now, Naomi took a careful half-step forward and moved slowly, deliberately, reaching for the wallet tucked into the back pocket of her jeans. "Absolutely. My ID is right here," she replied. "I'm active duty military. General Naomi Ellsworth. I'm on official business." Delaney, the younger of the two, gave a sharp laugh. General, huh? You expecting us to believe that? Naomi pulled out her military credentials and her federal travel orders, extending them with steady hands toward the officers. Cooper snatched the documents without hesitation, barely glancing at them before scoffing and tossing them onto the hood of her rental car like garbage. This is fake, he said dismissively. Naomi blinked, caught off guard for the first time. Sir, I assure you. Shut up, Delaney snapped. You think you can play us, lady? You picked the wrong town. A small crowd had begun to gather by now. Drivers, curious station workers, and a few people who had pulled in for gas were now lingering to see what would happen next. Some whispered behind cupped hands. Others smirked or laughed. No one stepped forward. No one questioned what they were watching. Naomi's training screamed at her to de-escalate, to keep her voice even, to avoid any sudden movements. But something deeper inside her warned that these two men weren't here for clarity. They had already made up their minds about who she was, and worse, who she wasn't. She tried again, keeping her voice low but firm. Please contact your supervisor. You're making a serious mistake. But Cooper had already pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Naomi didn't move. Not out of defiance, but because something in her, something heavy, had just broken free. I am a general in the United States Army, she said, her voice now edged with fire. You are unlawfully detaining me. Cooper laughed, a full, barking laugh loud enough that the people standing nearby heard it echo off the gas pumps. Yeah, and I'm the president. Now turn around. Before she could say another word, Delaney grabbed her arm roughly, and Cooper twisted the other behind her back. The cuffs clicked tight around her wrists, digging into the skin. Naomi clenched her jaw, fighting the surge of humiliation that came hot and sharp. Behind her, the secure phone, still connected to the Pentagon, slipped from the hood and clattered onto the concrete. The voice on the other end was already shouting her name. Alarm rising, but neither officer noticed. Or maybe they didn't care. Cooper shoved Naomi forward, slamming her against the side of the rental car hard enough to shake the frame. A ripple of gasps moved through the crowd. Got her, Delaney muttered, like they'd just bagged a trophy. Naomi breathed through her nose, her eyes locked on the greasy window of Kelly's Fuel and Food. Her reflection was fractured by dirt and age, her face split into distorted pieces. In that moment, she wasn't a general. She wasn't even a woman. She was a target, someone to control, humiliate, and discard. But what the officers didn't know, what no one standing there realized, was that the Pentagon was already reacting. And Naomi Ellsworth was not the kind of person who disappeared without the world noticing. Back in Washington, D.C., inside a secure operations room filled with glowing monitors and military-grade surveillance systems, Lieutenant Commander Bryce Hanley stared at the blinking red line labeled Gen. Ellsworth Secure. The audio feed had turned chaotic. Background noise. Raised voices. Then silence. General Ellsworth, this is Command Ops. Do you copy? Bryce leaned into the mic. General Ellsworth, respond. Nothing. He looked up at Colonel Dana Sharp, who was already moving fast across the operations floor. Ping her location, Sharp ordered, her voice slicing through the hum of background chatter. Within moments, a tech zoomed in on a blinking dot. It wasn't near Barksdale Air Force Base. It was sitting still at a gas station just off Highway 171 in a town called Mosswood, a place that didn't even show up in briefings. Colonel Sharp narrowed her eyes as she leaned over Bryce's shoulder. Get her out of there, she said coldly. Now. Colonel Dana Sharp's jaw clenched as she leaned over the operations console in D.C. Get Barksdale security on the line, she snapped. And patch me through to JAG. If something's happened to General Ellsworth, we move. No hesitation. Meanwhile, back in Mosswood, Naomi sat on the scalding curb outside the gas station, her back against the hot concrete wall. The handcuffs were still tight around her wrists, the skin beneath them raw and sore. She didn't flinch. She didn't fidget. She sat in silence like a mountain, still, steady, and immovable. Officer Delaney loomed over her, his shadow stretched long across the pavement like some second-rate interrogator in a dime store crime film. What's your real name? He asked, voice coated in suspicion. Who you working for? Naomi exhaled slowly through her nose, her posture unbroken. "You have my identification, my federal orders. Everything you need is right there on the hood of my car." Cooper snorted. "Lady, you're about 2 seconds from being booked for obstruction. Don't push it." Naomi didn't respond. She wasn't going to give them the pleasure of seeing her plead. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught sight of smartphones raised in the crowd. People were recording. Some whispered. Some chuckled. But still no one stepped in. The scene had turned into entertainment for the bored and biased. Near the doorway of the station, Paula stood with her arms crossed, grinning like she was watching a cage fight in her front yard. No one seemed interested in justice. No one seemed concerned with truth. The whole situation was spiraling and fast. Then Delaney's radio crackled. "Dispatch to Unit 3. Confirm you have detained the subject." Cooper grabbed the radio, irritation in his voice. "Affirmative. Female. Early 40s. Refusing to cooperate." There was a pause. Then clear and sharp. "Be advised, subject is flagged federal. Repeat, flagged federal. Pentagon has initiated emergency contact. Release immediately and await further instructions." Cooper's face drained of color. Delaney's grin evaporated. The smug assurance melted off them in an instant. "What the hell?" Delaney muttered. Naomi didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just looked up at them with the kind of silent confidence that says, "I warned you." Cooper fumbled with his keys, unlocking the cuffs without looking her in the eye. Ma'am," he muttered, something between an apology and a coward's whisper. Naomi stood slowly, rolling her shoulders and flexing her sore wrists. The metal had left deep red impressions in her skin. She glanced around. The crowd, which once buzzed with amusement, was now silent. Even Paula had lost her grin. Naomi bent down, picked up her secure phone. The screen was cracked. Connection lost. Sensitive intel possibly compromised. She looked back at the officers, eyes sharp and unblinking. "You're going to regret this," she said quietly. "Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today." Before Cooper could respond, the low rumble of engines filled the air. A convoy of black SUVs roared into the parking lot, tires screeching, doors flying open in near-perfect unison. This wasn't local police. This was military, Barksdale Air Force Base's elite response team. No pomp, no ceremony, just purpose and precision. From the lead vehicle stepped Lieutenant Colonel Darren Mosley, mid-40s, eyes sharp as razors, face carved from stone. He crossed the lot in long, fast strides, a secure folder tucked under one arm. His eyes locked on Naomi the second he arrived. "General Ellsworth, are you injured?" he asked, his voice firm, carrying over the stunned silence. Naomi stood tall. "No, Colonel. Minor abrasions. The real injury was to their careers." Cooper and Delaney shifted uncomfortably, finally beginning to understand just how badly they'd screwed up. Without needing to be told, the military officers formed a wall around Naomi, placing themselves between her and the Mosswood police. Mosley turned to the officers, his face unreadable. "You are hereby ordered to stand down. Effective immediately. There is an ongoing federal investigation. Any further action by you could constitute obstruction of justice." Cooper stammered. We didn't know who she was." "That's not a defense." Mosley cut in flat and final. "You had her credentials. You had her orders. Everything was in your hands." Delaney, trying to salvage his pride, muttered, "She was acting suspicious." Mosley stared at him, silent. Then his voice dropped, quiet but cutting. "You saw a black woman on a secure phone, and you made a choice. A choice that's going to haunt every day of your career. You profiled a decorated officer of the United States Army, and you treated her like a criminal." Delaney opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Naomi didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She just stood there, centered in her authority, no longer needing to prove anything to anyone. Because now the entire world would see the truth. Starting today, the Air Force team moved with quiet efficiency, ensuring General Naomi Ellsworth was safely seated in the back of the lead SUV. As the convoy pulled away from the gas station, Naomi glanced out the tinted window one last time. She saw Cooper wiping sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand, his bravado long gone. and Paula scurrying back inside like a cockroach caught in the kitchen light. Naomi said nothing. She didn't have to. The damage was already done, but not to her. Inside the SUV, the hum of the engine was the only sound at first. Naomi sat still, eyes locked on the passing blur of highway and swaying fields. Her thoughts churned fast and hard. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Finally, Colonel Mosley broke the silence. "Pentagon's already coordinating a full investigation, ma'am. Internal Affairs. Civil Rights Division. This one's going public, whether Mosswood likes it or not." Naomi didn't nod. She didn't smile. Her voice was calm but cold. They should have known better. Mosley's jaw tightened. They're going to find out what it feels like to finally be seen for who they really are. The convoy sped on through the Louisiana landscape, past leaning telephone poles and fields baked under the southern sun. They were headed for Barksdale Air Force Base, where Naomi's rank would finally be respected again. But she knew this wasn't over. Not even close. By the time Naomi finished her initial debrief, the storm had already hit. Someone had uploaded the cell phone footage. Raw, shaky video captured the exact moment two Mosswood police officers shoved handcuffs onto a calm black woman, who clearly identified herself as a United States Army general. There was no shouting, no resistance, just a quiet dignity being stripped away by two men too drunk on their own authority to see who they were dealing with. The internet lit up like wildfire. By dawn, Mosswood wasn't a forgotten dot on the Louisiana map anymore. It was the epicenter of a national reckoning. News outlets ran the story on a loop. Civil rights leaders labeled it a textbook case of racial profiling and abuse of power. Political commentators from both sides of the aisle demanded answers. Even veteran organizations, normally careful to avoid political controversy, released statements condemning the officers and calling for full accountability. In Mosswood, chaos reigned. The local police department scrambled to contain the fallout. Press trucks lined the streets. Reporters flooded the sleepy town. Police Chief Vernon Grady, more accustomed to deer season than the national spotlight, stood under a blazing sun in front of a wall of microphones. His cowboy hat did little to hide the sweat dripping down his face. "We regret the misunderstanding," he stammered, eyes darting anywhere but at the cameras. "The officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending a full internal review." He didn't get far. A young reporter from Baton Rouge cut in. "Chief Grady, how is it that two trained officers failed to recognize federal military credentials? Are you saying race played no role in this so-called misunderstanding?" Grady fumbled. Something about tension, miscommunication, standard procedures. But the truth was hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. Everyone watching knew it. This wasn't just a mistake. This was systemic. Meanwhile, Cooper and Delaney had gone silent. But it was too late. Their names had already leaked, splashed across news tickers, trending hashtags, and national headlines. Anonymous sources inside the Mosswood Police Department revealed a troubling history. Prior complaints of excessive force, profiling, abuse of power, all quietly buried. But not this time. Civil rights attorneys from New Orleans and Washington, D.C. filed formal complaints on Naomi's behalf. The Department of Justice launched an independent inquiry. Even the governor of Louisiana called the incident an appalling miscarriage of justice against a national hero. It wasn't just about General Naomi Ellsworth anymore. She had become a symbol of every person ever dismissed, doubted, degraded because of the skin they wore or the assumptions others made. This was bigger than her. At Barksdale, Naomi worked through non-stop briefings, Pentagon officials, legal counsel, even a liaison from the White House checking in hourly. She sat through it all with the same unshakable calm she had carried through war zones, commanding units under fire. But even then, through the blur of interviews and policy reviews, Naomi Ellsworth knew the real fight was just beginning. And this time, the whole world would be watching. Alone in the quiet of her quarters, General Naomi Ellsworth finally let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. It pressed hard against her chest, not because she was surprised, but because after 3 decades of service, after earning every medal stitched onto her uniform, after enduring battlefields, bureaucracies, and the burden of command, None of it had mattered in that dusty parking lot in Mosswood. Not to them. To them, she was just another black woman with too much confidence and not enough fear. But Naomi wasn't built to run from battles. She had stared down real enemies in real wars. And she sure as hell wasn't about to shrink in the face of ignorance and small-town arrogance. Still, this fight would be different. This one wouldn't be fought with strategy maps and battalions. If she was going to speak, it would be on her terms, not just for herself, but for every silent face watching from the shadows. The press conference was scheduled for noon that Saturday, just outside the gates of Barksdale Air Force Base. The air was thick with humidity and anticipation, buzzing with the tension that comes before something important. Cameras were already lined up in chaotic rows, microphones stacked in bundles. Reporters paced, murmuring into cell phones, sweat beading on their foreheads, not just from the Louisiana heat, but from the weight of what was about to be said. Naomi stepped out in her full-dress uniform for the first time in months. The deep blue jacket, crisp and immaculate, carried the weight of her service. Her medals gleamed in the sun like defiant stars. Her shoulders were squared, her jaw set. She wasn't there to smooth things over. She wasn't there to play politics. She was there to tell the truth. Colonel Mosley stood off to the side, arms crossed, eyes watchful. A few senior Pentagon officials flanked him, their expressions tight and unreadable. They had offered Naomi a carefully prepared statement. Safe language, non-confrontational, risk-free. She had respectfully declined. When Naomi stepped to the podium, the crowd went quiet. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone commanded the moment. "My name is General Naomi Ellsworth," she began, her voice like steel under pressure. "I have spent 29 years serving this country, leading troops into combat, advising presidents, and defending the ideals enshrined in our Constitution." She paused, letting the words settle. Yesterday in Mosswood, Louisiana, none of that mattered. There was a shift in the crowd, a murmur of awareness. Naomi pressed on. "I was not judged by my actions, my rank, or the uniform I wore. I was judged by the color of my skin, and the assumptions made about me because of it." Reporters scrambled to keep up, pens flying over notepads, camera shutters clicking like distant gunfire. But Naomi wasn't speaking for them. She was speaking to every person who had seen the video, to every soul who had felt that sharp, familiar pang, the gut twist of being doubted, demeaned, or dismissed. "I am not here today asking for an apology," she said, her voice unwavering. "I am here because silence is no longer an option. I am here because accountability matters. Respect matters. Human dignity matters. And none of these things are negotiable based on someone's ignorance or prejudice." Behind the press, a crowd had gathered. Locals, veterans, black families, students. Some held signs, handwritten, heartfelt. Naomi caught glimpses of their faces. Some angry, some proud, some just waiting for someone, anyone, to speak a truth they could believe in. "Injustice is not new," Naomi continued. "But change only happens when enough people refuse to look away. You saw it happen. You watched the footage. You know what it was. This isn't about misunderstanding. It's about accountability, for those who wield power and forget the responsibility that comes with it." She paused again, this time longer. "I was not humiliated yesterday. They were. And history will remember it that way." She stepped back from the microphone. No slogans. No rehearsed applause lines. Just truth, dropped like a stone into still water. At first, there was silence. Then someone clapped. Then another. And another. It built, wave after wave, until the air was filled with something real, something raw. It wasn't the roar of a stadium. It was the sound of people recognizing truth when they heard it. Naomi turned and walked away from the podium. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. The way she always had. Each step measured. Purposeful. She didn't need to look back. The ripples had already started. Inside the base, she was met with updates, calls, debriefs. The Pentagon. Civil rights attorneys. A liaison from the White House. But Naomi stayed grounded. She answered every question. Made every decision. Not just as a general, but as a witness, a voice, a standard bearer. because she understood something most people forgot. The world doesn't change overnight. It may not even change in a lifetime, but it can change, inch by inch, truth by truth, when someone refuses to be quiet. And Naomi Ellsworth had never been quiet in the face of injustice. So let them write their headlines. Let them roll their footage. Let them remember her not just as a general, but as a woman who stood tall when others tried to drag her down. Because dignity doesn't get cuffed. And real change starts with voices strong enough to speak, especially when hands are still shaking.